Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening.
When did you buy it? Questioned Roxan with a slightly tense tone and trembling eyelashes. We didn't leave each other when we were in the mall, and I didn't see him buy a gift. Lucian knitted his eyebrow and answered in a resigned tone, when I brought my bags here earlier. I didn't expect you to get lost when I was delayed for a few minutes. His lips curled into a wry smile when he recalled the rare dazed look on her face from earlier. When he brought that up, she blushed and reflexively avoided his stare, inadvertently shifting her line of sight to the box on the seat. Lucian coaxed, get in the car. It's getting late. If we don't set off now, it'll be night by the time we return home. Nodding hesitantly, Roxan stepped into the seat. He entered the driver's seat and drove off. Meanwhile, she put the white box on her knees instead of opening them. He didn't urge her either. After they left the parking lot, he asked, do you want to visit the nursing home first, or should we head straight back home? I know she's worried about the residents there, and we'll be heading in its direction anyway. His question came as a surprise for Roxan. She pondered for a moment and answered, the nursing home first. Okay. Lucian then drove toward the destination. Seeing how familiar he was with the path to the nursing home, she wondered, I don't remember telling him the address, yet he seems to know where to go. No, I shouldn't overthink it. After the car was parked in front of the nursing home, Roxan stepped into the building. She saw the doctors were still busying about, but she could tell from their expressions that the rest of the residents were in good condition. Still, she approached a few doctors and asked them about the situation. It wasn't until she had confirmation the residents were doing fine that she relaxed. Before she left, she came across a few of the residents she examined yesterday. They were worried when they saw Jack wasn't with her. Why didn't you visit with Dr. Damaris today, Dr. Jarvis? Did you two have a fight? Roxan was bidding the other residents goodbye with a smile when she heard that. Her grin froze before she turned around and explained resignedly to the old woman speaking to her. You have misunderstood our relationship, Granny. Dr. Damaris and I are just colleagues. Just as she ended her sentence, she felt the person behind her stepping closer to her. She didn't mind since it wasn't the first time they stood so intimately with each other. Moments later, she saw the realization in the resident's eyes. It does seem like we've misunderstood your relationship with Dr. Damaris, Dr. Jarvis. This is your boyfriend, right? The old woman swiftly corrected herself and inspected Lucian briefly. He's tall and handsome. I think he's a good fit for you, Dr. Jarvis. Roxan opened her mouth, intending to offer some clarification. However, when she thought about the things that happened between her and Lucian, she didn't have it in her to deny that statement. The edges of Lucian's mouth curved upward. He behaved gentlemanly with no intention of denying it, too. The old woman stared at Roxan caringly. Is he a doctor too? He's not, Roxan replied rigidly. In response, the old woman shook her head and remarked sincerely, then he's a little lacking compared to Dr. Damaris. I don't think you two have much to talk about since you two are not in the same profession. Roxan could feel the temperature around Lucian dropping rapidly, so she interrupted the old lady. I'm just here to check up on you all's condition. Since all of you are doing fine, I'll be going home now. I'll visit if I have the time in the future. The residents knew her home was in Horrington after chatting with her yesterday. Thus, they urged the couple to leave right away to avoid driving at night. Roxan didn't feel relieved even after leaving the nursing home because Lucian was still visibly bothered by the old lady's words. Resignedly, she comforted, don't take that granny's words to heart, Lucian. There really isn't anything between Mr. Damaris and me. He glanced at her. Do you converse with him often? It's just medical stuff. That's all, clarified Roxan seriously. I only got to know Jack because we're in the same field. Aside from matters related to medicine, There isn't anything else for us to talk about, so there's no way I'll have feelings for him." When Lucian heard that, his expression returned to normal. "What, aren't you opening it? Do you not like it?" He started the engine and glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Shaking her head, she replied, No, I just want to open it after we return." She was too embarrassed to open his gift in front of him, especially when she didn't know what he had bought. Disappointment flashed past his eyes when he heard that, though he didn't force her. By the time they arrive in Horrington, the sky had turned dark. Lucian sent Roxanne straight back to the mansion. The children were playing around with Linda in the living room. Upon hearing the sound of a car, they scampered to the entrance. "Mommy! Daddy!" Estella immediately clung to Roxanne's leg and looked at her. Grinning, Roxanne patted the girl's head. "Did you miss me?" Estella nodded and replied cutely, "I missed you a lot. Aunt Linda told us she was going to video call you just earlier." While the boys were enjoying themselves, they were moving pretty slowly. Thus, after Roxanne watched them for a while, she also helped out. Soon, everything in the vehicle was carried into the mansion. Meanwhile, Estella climbed into the car to assist the boys. When she left, she spotted the white box on the passenger seat. Intrigued, she brought the box out of the car and asked, What's this, Mommy?" Everyone turned to the girl when they heard that. Upon eyeing the box, Roxanne subconsciously glanced at Lucian. He just stood at the side nonchalantly as though that box had nothing to do with him. Since the adults didn't tell Estella she couldn't touch it, and she didn't receive a reply from Roxanne, she opened it out of curiosity. It was then Roxanne saw what was inside in the box. "It's so pretty." Estella stood on her toes and lifted her hand to let her mother see the object taken from the box. "Is this Daddy's gift for you, Mommy?" In response, Roxanne lowered her eyes and saw a platinum necklace embedded with a glittering diamond in the girl's palm. It looked simple yet exquisite. The boys sauntered closer to their mother with intrigue when they heard what their sister said. Upon seeing it was a necklace, the boys exchanged glances and encouraged, "You should help Mommy put it on, Mr. Farwell. I bet Mommy will look good with it." Roxanne took a step back reflexively and turned to Lucian with a troubled look. "I'm already embarrassed that Essie opened the gift in front of him, yet now the children are urging him to put it on for me. Daddy!" After trotting to her father's side, Estella lifted the necklace and stared at him with anticipation. Lucian lowered his head, patted the girl, grabbed the necklace, and approached Roxanne. Even though Roxanne wanted to step away, she didn't feel like it would be a good idea to do so in front of the children. Thus, she could only watch him arrive in front of her. The children surrounded their parents and peered at them with excitement. Lucian grinned. "Since they're eager to watch me put this on you, let's just get it over with, all right? Why is he saying it like he's forcing himself to do it?" Resignedly, she shifted her sight toward the children and met their bright eyes. Of course, she knew they wouldn't stop egging her about it if she didn't play along. Therefore, she lowered her head, revealing her fair, slender neck. As Lucian took one step closer to her, his leather shoes entered her field of view. Then his refreshing yet mature scent rushed into her nose. Roxanne panicked when she felt an occasional, tingly sensation on her neck. It was caused by his sleeve brushing on her neck. Moments later, he stepped back while she felt the cold necklace around her neck. She sighed inwardly, adjusted her expression, and slowly lifted her head. Unbeknownst to her, the children saw her expression when she bent her head down. Just as Roxanne raised her head, she heard Benny asking, "Were you blushing earlier, Mommy?" Upon hearing Benny's words, Roxanne felt embarrassed again after having just regained her composure. Echoing through her ear, Lucian's deep voice carried a hint of amusement. Take a look. Do you like it? I wasn't really sure what to buy and the sales attendant recommended me another design. However, I think this one suits you better." Roxanne seized upon the opportunity to avert her gaze from his. Turning around, she checked the rearview mirror to see how she looked. She was greeted by the sight of a platinum necklace circling her neck. Hanging between her collarbones was a minimalistic round pendant that was covered with crushed diamonds. Sitting right in the center, it made her look as if her collarbones were sparkling. It was a sight that bedazzled her. Lucian, who had somehow walked up behind her, asked anxiously, "Do you like it?" Upon regaining her senses, Roxan turned around and smiled. It's beautiful. I love it, Mr. Farr." She almost addressed him as Mr. Farwell out of habit, but the thought of their currently ambiguous relationship made her change her mind. "Thank you. I appreciate it very much." As what she almost called him by didn't escape his notice, Lucian's gaze darkened, although he refrained from commenting. Meanwhile, the children surrounded Roxan and gasped in awe. "Mommy, you're gorgeous. The necklace really suits you. In fact, it looks even more beautiful on you. Mr. Farwell has a sharp eye indeed." The praise they showered on her caused Roxan to blush. Trying hard to hide her emotions, she looked down at the children and smiled. "You haven't opened the presents I bought you, have you? Let's go inside and do it." Elated by the mention of presents, the children followed Roxan into the mansion. After the children settled down on the sofa to open their presents, jubilant cheers echoed in the living room from time to time. When she saw how happy the children looked, Roxan beamed with satisfaction. At that moment, a warm and familial atmosphere filled the living room. Standing by the side and watching Roxan interacting happily with the children while wearing the necklace he gave her, Lucian couldn't help but imagine it to be a proposal ring that Roxan was wearing on her finger. "I wonder how long does Roxan want me to wait?" Just as he was lost in his thoughts, the children's voices suddenly rang out beside his ear. "Daddy, look. I'm wearing the same outfit as Archie and Benny." Estella's voice brimmed with excitement. When Lucian looked down, he noticed all three of them were wearing the t-shirts and shorts Roxan bought them. She had chosen vibrant colors on purpose so that both boys and girls would look equally good in them. Dressed in the same outfits, the children looked up at Lucian. In that instant, he suddenly felt as if all three of them resembled each other. Nonetheless, the feeling quickly dissipated when they turned their attention away. "Daddy, help us take a picture." Only Estella maintained her gaze as she tugged at his sleeve. "I want to take a picture." When Lucian raised Estella, he seldom took pictures of her. Hence, the only pictures at home were mostly taken by Sonia when she visited. However, ever since Estella began to spend time with Roxan, the latter's habit of taking pictures rubbed off on her. Thus, she would often wish to have her picture taken for the sake of memory. Since it was a simple task, Lucian had no reason to refuse. Whipping out his phone, he did his duty as the cameraman. Before they knew it, darkness took over the sky. After acting as a driver and mover for the day and giving Roxan a gift, Lucian naturally stayed back for dinner. Once they had their fill, he played with the children for a while before taking his leave. "It's getting late, so I'll be going home now. Essie." Before he could even finish, Essie declined. I want to stay with Mommy." Lucian threw her a glance before continuing, "I'll leave Essie with you for the next 2 days. Tell me if you can't manage, and I'll come and pick the children up." Archie and Benny's eyes lit up when they heard Lucian's words. Given how smart they were, they caught the most important part of his sentence. He considered them his children. Even though they couldn't address him as daddy yet, he had already seen them as his own. Both of them were ecstatic when the fact dawned upon them. As for Estella, she was filled with delight upon receiving permission to stay with her mother. Stroking Estella's face gently, Roxan agreed with a smile. "She'll be in good hands." Lucian flashed a smile. "I know. Even if Roxan didn't do anything in particular, Estella would be happy just staying by her side." With that, Lucian drove back to the manor after leaving Roxan's home. The moment he stepped in, he was greeted by the glum-looking Sonia sitting on the couch. What are you doing here?" With an equally solemn expression, Lucian took a seat in the armchair beside his mother. Sonia's brows knitted at her son's question. Why can't I drop by?" What's wrong with me wanting to visit my granddaughter? Lucian gave her the side eye while maintaining his frosty expression. Essie's not here. She's with her mom. His voice made it sound like he and Roxanne were a married couple who happened to be separated by distance. The frown on Sonia's face deepened. I was the one who painstakingly raised Essie, while that woman abandoned her after giving birth. She should be thanking me for allowing Essie to acknowledge her instead. Don't you think it's unfair to me to let Essie stay with her and allow her to enjoy the fruits of my labor? From Sonia's perspective, Roxanne had no hand in bringing Estella up into a healthy and obedient girl. Even if Roxanne didn't do anything in particular, Estella would be happy just staying by her side. That woman wasn't around when Essie needed her the most, so why is she acting all noble now? Lucian furrowed his brows. Roxanne is Essie's birth mother. Besides, what happened back then was a misunderstanding. I'm sure you heard of it too. Roxanne had thought that Essie was dead. Sonia snorted in response. Nobody knows if she's telling the truth. Back then, she left without saying a word. I wouldn't be surprised if she does anything terrible now. Upon hearing his mother's words, there was a hint of disbelief as Lucian stared at her. Sonia changed her tact reluctantly, cognizant that she had upset her son. I was the one who raised Essie, so how can I not miss my granddaughter? By leaving her with Roxanne, what am I to do when I miss her? Lucian replied in annoyance. After spending so much time with Essie throughout the years, what's the big deal about not seeing her for a few days? Now that her condition has improved, she needs Roxanne by her side. Also, you not seeing her will allow her emotions to stabilize. What are you trying to say? Sonia was outraged by her son's ridicule. Roxanne might be Essie's birth mother, but I'm her biological grandmother too. How will my visit agitate her? Yes, I realize that I used the wrong method in educating Essie previously, but I have apologized for it and promised not to behave that way again. Lucian pinched his forehead as his frustration with his mother began to grow. I'm glad you know that you're responsible for what has become of your relationship with Essie. Even though Lucian didn't know what his mother did for Estella to resent her so much, he had learned his lesson from what happened with Aubrey. In fact, details weren't important. What truly mattered was Estella's will. Thus, Lucian would keep those Estella resented away from her until she was willing to forgive them. With nothing to counter Lucian with, Sonia felt her exasperation grow. No matter what, I'll never hurt Essie. Lucian agreed with a nod. I know, but you're still not patient enough. Besides, if you're really concerned about her, you should understand what her true needs are. Sonia obviously knew what they were. What are you trying to say? That little girl can't help but stick to Roxanne like glue now. That was the exact reason she was upset. When something suddenly occurred to her, she suppressed the anger in her heart. Since you don't want me to interfere with Essie's life, let's talk about the Pearson family. Lucian's face turned grim at the mention of the Pearson family. What about them? Wearing an awkward expression, Sonia spoke in a dissatisfied tone. Aren't you being too harsh on the Pearson family? Both our families go back a long way, while old Mr. Pearson is still your benefactor in the end. Is it really necessary to drive them into a corner when teaching them a lesson is enough? Lucian replied firmly, they brought this upon themselves. Sonia frowned. It's true that they have made a mistake, but by being so ruthless against them, it sends out the wrong signal to the other families. Who will dare work with us after this? Now that you have cancelled the engagement with Aubrey, she won't be able to harm Essie anymore. That alone should be enough. At the back of her mind, Sonia was still planning to turn Aubrey into an obedient puppet of hers. Aubrey aside, no other family will dare allow their daughter to marry into our family once they see how vindictive our family can be. The more Sonia thought about it, the more worried she became. Hence, the main purpose of her visit was to discuss the issue with Lucian. However, Lucian's expression drastically changed when his mother pleaded for mercy on behalf of the Pearson family. Before they harmed Essie, They should have considered the consequences of crossing me. Besides, I don't think the lesson I have taught them comes close to being enough. Even Sonia couldn't help but shudder in the face of Lucian's rage. Despite that, she was adamant in her persuasion. Don't forget that Aubrey had waited for you many years and her feelings for you are true. She just chose the wrong way. Before she could finish, Lucian cut her off. Don't ever mention that wicked woman in front of me. If this is all you want to talk about today, you can leave now. I'm tired and need to rest. With that, Lucian headed upstairs without giving Sonia the opportunity to respond. His reaction rendered Sonia speechless. That night, Jonathan could barely sleep after receiving a message from Lucian. At daybreak the next morning, Jonathan strode into the Farwell residence. Mr. Queen, Catalina greeted him upon his arrival. Jonathan nodded in acknowledgement. Where's Lucian? He went up to his study after breakfast. Jonathan then ended his conversation with Catalina and headed up. There was no way he could rest until he clarified with Lucian what the message from the night before meant. Just as he was about to knock, the door opened from the inside. What are you doing here? Lucian gave his guest a placid look before inviting him into the study. Jonathan almost choked on himself. Why is he even asking me that? I obviously want to know what he is trying to convey with the message last night. It's one thing for me to do his bidding all the time, but what's with throwing a hot potato in my direction out of nowhere? Because of him, I hardly slept a wink. Lucian, aren't you being unreasonable? The exasperated Jonathan took his seat opposite Lucian. Why did you have to drag me into this mess with the Pearson family? Although everyone is kicking them while they're down, wouldn't it be inappropriate for the Queen family to join in? Before Lucian's engagement with Aubrey was cancelled, the Farwell, Pearson, and Queen families enjoyed a close relationship. Now that the two families had fallen out, it wouldn't look good on the Queen family if they were to take over Pearson Group. Jonathan had to take the interest of the Queen family into account, although he disagreed with Aubrey's actions. Cocking his brow, Lucian couldn't believe his ears. What's wrong? You're not the one engaged to her. Don't tell me that you secretly harbor feelings for her? Jonathan was triggered by his friend's words. Me? Interest in her? Oh, please. The last thing I want is to be anywhere near her. Lucian frowned in response. So, what's the problem? The Queen family has always been close to the Farwell family. Now that we have cast aside the Pearson family, you'll have to make your stand public sooner or later. Seeing the truth in Lucian's words, Jonathan wrinkled his brows without retorting. Lucian added, furthermore, Queen Group and Pearson Group are both involved in the medical industry. It's only natural the former takes over the latter. It's also a brilliant opportunity for Queen Group to expand. Jonathan couldn't deny that every word of Lucian's struck a chord with him. The wavering look in his eyes grew increasingly obvious. Weighing the consequences was the main reason he was unable to sleep. Even though taking over the Pearson family business was detrimental to Queen Group's reputation, it was nothing compared to the company's expansion that resulted. Furthermore, it was as Lucian had said, the relationship between the Queen family and the Pearson family was established on the account of the Farwell family. Now that the Farwell and Pearson had fallen out, there was no reason for the Queen family to maintain that relationship. Holding that thought, Jonathan made his decision. I understand. Leave it to me. Now that he thought about it, he realized there was no reason for his earlier hesitancy. Lucian broke into a smile when he saw that Jonathan was convinced. I have not forgotten all the help you have extended to me recently. The assets of the Pearson family will be my way of thanking you. At Lucian's remark, Jonathan inwardly rolled his eyes. I was the one who expended the effort to obtain them. That being said, the Pearson family doesn't have the capability to fight me, considering their current state. Basically, they're free resources. Lucian merely regarded the man with an inscrutable look in his eyes. Intimidated by his stare, Jonathan changed the subject and inquired about his relationship with Roxan at present. How are things going with Roxan? Don't tell me there's no progress even after you went on a trip with her. I'd been racking my brain to give him ideas for a long time. If there's really no progress, I truly feel sorry for Roxan. Speaking of the events that transpired in Jadeborough, Lucian inexorably recalled that passionate night there. His gaze darkened a shade. Jonathan noticed the change in the man's expression. Alas, he couldn't tell what it meant and could only eye Lucian in puzzlement. Just answer the question. Don't grin so devilishly when I'm not Roxan. No sooner had those words rang out than Lucian corralled his thoughts. His expression turned indifferent once more. It's going pretty well, thanks to your idea. That was considered his reply to the question earlier. However, Jonathan remained unsatisfied and wanted to know the details. What does that mean? What stage exactly have things progressed to? Based on his understanding of Lucian, merely holding hands would already be considered a pretty well, since the latter's relationship with Roxan was exceedingly tense previously. Regretfully, Lucian merely smiled without saying anything. Jonathan scrutinized him for a long moment while speculating soundlessly. They must have made rapid progress. Otherwise, he wouldn't be wearing such an expression. Following that realization, gratification flooded him. Yay! My back-breaking effort in giving him countless ideas hadn't gone to waste. As Lucian seeming had no plans of revealing anything further, he tacitly stopped harping on that line of question. Subsequently, the two of them briefly discussed the Pearson family's resources. Although Jonathan had already decided to acquire those assets, he still had to be mindful of his boundaries. When the discussion ended, Jonathan got up and left, heading directly to Queen Group. That very afternoon, Pearson Group, which was already in a precarious state, suddenly took a turn for the worse. Despite having sold off most of the shares in his hands, Samuel still had to clean up his own mess. As Pearson Group's share prices plummeted sharply, all shareholders started complaining incessantly. For that reason, Pearson Group had no choice but to lower the share prices repeatedly. Unexpectedly, a few branch offices were requested to be delisted and liquidated due to the overly low share prices. Consequently, Pearson Group was left with no other recourse but to sacrifice those few branch offices. The other members of the Pearson family, whose interests were linked to those companies, were already resentful because of the trouble caused by Samuel and his family. In the face of their companies facing the threat of bankruptcy, they just about camped at the man's house, demanding an explanation from him. Hence, Samuel was swamped. Even Aubrey was forced to cooperate with her father to resolve the mess together despite her dissatisfaction with the current situation. Unfortunately, nothing quite worked even after they had bustled around for a long time. It was as though someone was pushing things along behind the scenes, for the speed at which Pearson Group was deteriorating was unbelievably fast. In just a few days, almost all of the Pearson family's companies had been shut down. The handful that remained were also struggling badly while surviving on bank loans. Alas, the person manipulating things secretly didn't even leave them that much hope. Instead, he seemed determined on destroying the Pearson family entirely. Even the bank was no longer willing to give them any loans. Worse still, they were requested to repay their loans in the past. However, the Pearson family was in no state to repay their loans right then. The only recourse would be to declare bankruptcy. At that point, Aubrey felt as though her entire world had collapsed. After all, she had been living a pampered life since young and had never experienced such hardship. Aubrey's desperation was shared by Samuel, who had been bustling around for several days. Sonia's promise gave him hope, and he thought she would really succeed in convincing Lucian to spare the Pearson family this once. Little did he expect that not only did Farwell Group's oppression of the Pearson Group persist, but it even intensified. In fact, it was so bad that the Pearson family was on the verge of bankruptcy. His hard work in the past few days ended up in vain, resulting in his relatives knocking on his door and questioning him about it one after another. In just a few days, most of his hair had turned gray. At that very moment, Samuel was sitting at the desk in the study with a grim expression on his face. In front of him were a few staff members from the bank. At the same time, a handful of asset transfer agreements were clearly laid out on the desk. After the bank staff member had reviewed one of the documents, he slid it over to Samuel. Please sign here, Mr. Pearson." Jolted out of his thoughts, Samuel swept his gaze over the asset he had acquired through blood, sweat, and tears. Such distress inundated him that his hands trembled, and his signature became shaky. It went without saying that the bank's staff member showed no concern for his feelings. Seeing that the man had already signed the document, he started reviewing the next asset transfer agreement without hesitation. At the side, Gina stood before the desk, her face as pale as a sheet. She initially wanted to comfort Samuel, but his dark expression had her ultimately swallow the words on the tip of her tongue. She didn't even dare breathe, going out and pouring him a glass of water. Samuel was suppressing his wrath in the first place, so the sight of a glass of water appearing in his line of vision out of the blue promptly sparked his fury. Slamming his hand on the desk, he shot to his feet. "I'm not in the mood to drink water. I've got nothing left, and I can't even catch my breath." As though to verify his claim, the voice of the bank's staff member drifted into the air on the heels of that. "Mr. Pearson, this house no longer belongs to you. The bank will be seizing this mansion tomorrow morning. Please move out on time so as not to affect our work." Samuel was so livid that he trembled all over. Scram! Get out of here." The bank staff member knew that the Pearson family had already fallen and the man in front of him was nothing more than a paper tiger. Thus, he paid no mind to Samuel's fit of rage. "We have already contacted a moving company for you. Please move out as soon as possible. If you do not cooperate, we will be taking forceful measures." The instant Samuel heard that, his face flushed bright red with fury. The Pearson family has already fallen far from grace. If the bank were to employ forceful measures on top of that, I'd lose my dignity as well. He inhaled deeply several times. Ultimately, he said nothing further, merely watching the bank staff leave with a grave expression on his face. "Are we really moving out, Samuel?" When Gina and Samuel were the only ones left in the study, Gina gaped at the man incredulously. Ever since she married into the Pearson family, they had been living there. She was already accustomed to the place, so she truly couldn't accept abruptly moving out and to an inferior environment at that. Without warning, Samuel pounded his hand on the desk and snapped, "Why are you asking me that? You should go and ask your precious daughter. If it weren't for her, we would never have ended up in such straits." At his sudden outburst, Gina jumped in fright. She parted her lips slightly, but she dared not ask anything else. After venting his anger, Samuel plopped down dejectedly, thinking he would likely have to spend the rest of his life in poverty. The more he dwelled upon it, the more furious he grew. Samuel." Gina was racking her brain for a way out of the predicament when she saw Samuel abruptly leaping to his feet after bringing his hand down on the desk, then striding toward the study door. Upon seeing that, she hastily followed, afraid that he would do something impulsive again as before. Meanwhile, Aubrey was sitting in her bedroom with a gloomy expression on her face. The Queen family. It turned out to be the Queen family. While busy handling the mess in the past few days, she didn't forget to investigate the culprit sabotaging things behind the scenes. Initially, she thought that it would be some other family who seized that opportunity to hit them while they were down. Never had she imagined that it would be Jonathan. She could surmise without even having to ponder upon the matter that it was definitely Lucian who instructed him to do so. If he hadn't received an order from the latter, he wouldn't have had the guts to make a move rashly. Lucian. I never expected him to be so ruthless to me that he's determined to push me to a dead end." As she was fuming, her room door was suddenly pushed open. Snapping back to her senses, Aubrey snapped her eyes up and swung her gaze in the direction of the door. Just when she had made out the person who barged in, A slap from Samuel sent her tumbling back onto the bed. Samuel. Gina had also been exhausted in the past few days because of the Pearson family's downfall. Coupled with the blow she suffered earlier upon learning that they would have to move out before tomorrow, she was pitifully weak in the legs. By the time she finally arrived at Aubrey's room, she was greeted by the sight of Samuel slapping their daughter. Although Aubrey had done something wrong, she was still Gina's flesh and blood. It was as though that slap from Samuel struck her squarely, for her heart abruptly clenched. In a flash, strength infused her legs, and she sprinted over to shield her daughter. Get out of my way. I'm going to teach this imbecile a lesson today. Samuel snarled coldly. Calm down. Things are already set in stone anyway. Besides, Aubrey hasn't had it easy either these few days. She's already trying her best to make amends for her mistakes. Gina sounded mournful. When Samuel saw that she was still defending Aubrey, his temper spiked further. He was so enraged that his temples throbbed violently. Buzz off. Otherwise, I'm going to hit you as well. After bellowing that, he chastised furiously. This is all on you for spoiling her. If you hadn't encouraged her, she wouldn't have ended up with such attitude today. Gina was both panicked and fearful, her lips quivering uncontrollably. A step aside, Mom, Aubrey urged softly, gathering her wits about her at long last. Then, she stepped out from behind her mother. Holding her head up high, she regarded her father with obstinacy etched across her features. I did nothing wrong. Samuel lifted his hand and slapped her again. Even now, you're still unrepentant? Are you only going to admit to your mistake after I personally send you to prison? Aubrey cradled her cheek, madness brewing in her eyes. I did nothing wrong. If I really did something wrong, that was merely loving Lucian too deeply at that time. He has absolutely no regard for me. I hate him. Noticing that both women were utterly unremorseful, Samuel was so incensed that he almost burst a blood vessel. He calmed himself for some time before he finally managed to suppress his wrath forcibly. Get up and pack your things. When Aubrey heard that, she lifted her eyes and looked at her father in puzzlement. In turn, Samuel glared at her sharply. The Pearson family has gone bankrupt. On top of that, this house is no longer ours. It'll be seized tomorrow, and we've got to get out of here quickly. Bankrupt? Despite knowing ages ago that they would have to face that fact sooner or later, Aubrey still found it hard to believe upon hearing it from her father with her own ears. How could that be? How could it come to pass so quickly? Worse still, we don't even have a house in the end. I've got nothing left. If from now on, you'd better behave. If you were to create trouble again, we might not even be able to come out of it alive. Worried that he would really go off the deep end and pummel the two women to death if he continued to stay in the room, Samuel spun on his heel and left after saying that.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.